Yes, hopefully we will pass the bill. It's notable that it's not going to be passed under a rule, but under suspension, because Speaker Johnson doesn't have the support of his party to move this through. But it's expected to pass bipartisan, but it's not. We're not passing a budget. We're just kicking the can to December 20th, because for the last 6 months, we haven't been having the substantive conversations, discussions across the aisle with Democrats and Republicans about how do we want to fund our government, what should be our priorities, how to make the hard decisions that ultimately will have to be made before we pass the fiscal year 25 budget.
Well, and sir, when we consider those across the aisle conversations, when everybody comes back to Washington after the election, it'll be with the knowledge of whether you're staying in the minority or will have moved to the majority, whether or not the speaker will be looking at the prospects of still being speaker again, depending on what the new Congress looks like. Is he the most honest broker Democrats could hope to work with, or are you hoping there will be a change in Republican leadership?
Well, I'm not going to talk about Republican leadership. I hope there's going to be a change in House leadership, that the Democrats will retake the majority. I'll remind everybody that in the last Congress, Democrats had a 5-seat majority, the same margin that the Republicans started in this Congress. And in the last Congress, we were able to pass significant major legislation, most of it in a bipartisan way. This Congress, what we've seen is a Congress that hasn't been able to do anything, or almost anything, and it's been exceedingly frustrating. So I hope when we come back that the Democrats will have a majority, will be on a course to elect Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker, and that in the next Congress, beginning in January, we'll get back to the table, roll up our sleeves, and get the work of the American people done.
Well, of course, some of that work you do from your role as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So with that seat in mind, sir, I'd like to ask you about what we're seeing in the Middle East. The Associated Press is now reporting today that the Israeli military is preparing for a possible ground operation in Lebanon. This is according to the Israeli army chief. It, of course, comes as we're seeing escalation in the exchange of fire on Israel's northern border. A missile was sent toward Mossad near Tel Aviv that Israel intercepted today. Where do you see all of this going, sir? Is Israel wise to be looking at a potential ground operation, or should they be doing everything they can to de-escalate?
Well, I think both can be true at the same time, and you have to start where did this begin? On October 7th, as everyone knows, Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza, brutally murdered 1,200 people, took 250 people hostage, and started the war that has been raging for almost a year in Gaza. What's also notable is on the next day, the very next day, October 8th, Hezbollah started firing rockets into Israel in support of Hamas. And that has been going on now for, again, almost a year. More than 8,500 rockets, missiles, drones, anti-tank weapons have been fired by Hezbollah into Israel. Israel's been responding, and it has continued to escalate. 80,000 people have been evacuated from the border communities in Israel. Probably an equal number of Lebanese civilians have been evacuated, civilians who are not a part of Hezbollah but are suffering the consequences of Hezbollah's actions. So what Israel is doing is taking action against Hezbollah to try to secure its communities on the border with Lebanon. But this is also necessary to give security to the people in Lebanon who unfortunately are under the thumb of Hezbollah.
Well, and what role do you see the U.S. playing here if this continues to ramp up and we see more outward conflict between Israel and Hezbollah? Is there going to be an added need for the U.S. military presence in the region, or just more arms support? What exactly should the expectation be on what this administration and this Congress, frankly, is willing to provide?
Yeah, I think the first thing you see is that the administration is continuing to try to create the off-ramps. Amos Hochstein is in the region. President Biden has been committed to trying to de-escalate and create the space to move Hezbollah back from the Israeli border and try to resolve the disputes peacefully. And I think the United States will continue to do that. At the same time, going back to October 8th, when Hezbollah started striking, President Biden was very clear when he said don't, but he also backed up his words by sending aircraft carriers into the region. We continue to support Israel and Israel's right to defend itself, but we also should be supporting the Lebanese people. They've suffered. Lebanon, the economy is literally on its back, not even on its knees. The government is dysfunctional, all because Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is backed by Iran. Ultimately, it is Iran who's responsible, is holding back Lebanon from the possibility of moving forward. So I think the United States has a role to play there. And ultimately, as President Biden has said, Israel has a right to defend itself. The United States will stand with Israel as she does so.
I'd like to ask you about another conflict as well, the ongoing war in Ukraine, as the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke at the United Nations General Assembly in New York today. Here is a taster of what he said, and I have a question for you after.
Ukrainians will never accept why anyone in the world believes that such a brutal colonial past, which suits no one today, can be imposed on Ukraine now instead of a normal, peaceful life. Do not divide the world. Be united nations. And that will bring us peace.
Congressman, of course, Zelensky will be traveling from New York down here to Washington. He will, in fact, be on Capitol Hill tomorrow, meeting with some of your colleagues before everyone leaves town. Should he, in his visit to Washington, feel confident that he's going to be able to count on the same support from a Congress or any future administration as Ukraine has had to this point?
I think I'll take us back to a question you asked earlier about who is in the majority next year in Congress. Democrats have stayed committed to Ukraine throughout this war, where it's been more than 30 months since Russia initiated its invasion in February of 2022. As Zelensky said in the piece I heard, and I have not heard his whole speech yet, but he talked about the will, the desire of the Ukrainian people to remain independent. Just after the start of the war, I heard the Ukrainian ambassador speak here in Washington, saying that the previous 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union was the longest period of independence for Ukraine in hundreds of years, and that the people who had come to appreciate their independence, appreciate their freedom, we're going to fight for that freedom with every ounce of energy that they have. And the Ukrainians have continued that fight. They have fought nobly and bravely against the Russians and the West under the leadership of President Biden, but working with our allies in Europe and other allies around the world have helped ensure that Ukraine can sustain its fight, and we need to make sure that it sustains its fight, and that Russia cannot get either a strategic victory or ultimately take over Ukraine completely.
Will you, sir, be meeting with Zelensky tomorrow, or do you know of your colleagues who will be?
I will not be, but I don't know who's meeting. I'm not aware of any Foreign Affairs Committee meeting with President Zelensky. If something changes, I would love that opportunity.
Well, finally, before we let you go, sir, we have about a minute left. It's not just foreign affairs on which you sit, but you're also on the Ways and Means Committee. Knowing Kamala Harris is about to, just about 2 hours from now, give a speech on the manufacturing economy in which she may mention tax policy and raising the rates on, say, corporations or those with more than $1 million in income, their capital gains tax rate. To what extent can she reliably say those are policies that stand a chance of passing Congress, knowing we may well end up with divided government, even if she does win the election in November?
Well, irrespective of who wins in November, we know that the provisions of the 2017 tax code are going to expire at the end of next year. So Ways and Means in particular, but the House and the Senate as a whole will be digging deeply into the tax code and trying to develop new policy, hopefully new policy that will stand the test of time. And whatever tax policy we have has to be one that makes sure American companies, American workers can compete on a global stage, that we're investing in new innovations, new products, that we're training our workers, that we're developing the workforce for the future by investing in our kids. And so what I'm hopeful for next year as we open up the tax code and take what I believe and hope will be a deliberative and engaged and hopefully bipartisan approach to tax policy, we'll have policy that ensures that American companies lead the way.